Exciting. This morning we get to talk about doubting Vincent.
No. It's doubting Thomas.
What did I say?
You said doubting Vincent.
Wow, what a Freudian slip that was. Come to think of it, I spent 30 years being doubting Vincent. Most of you know that story. All right. For 30 years, I was an agnostic. Didn't know whether or not there was a God. All right, and there was times when I thought that there was a God, or was a higher power in my case, because of my AA upbringing. I was giving that person lip service. Now, interestingly, during that whole period of time, I chose to be in the cave that Drew talked about last week. All right. I did not want to come out of that cave. And when I did come out, I was running as fast as I can because the hound of heaven was nipping at my heels. The hound of heaven is always there. You can run as fast as you want, but the hound of heaven is there. Now, it's interesting because at some point, my loving wife convinced me that I would probably like to go to a rise in the basement of this church. And I did. And something happened. Now, I'm not big on religious art, but there are two pictures that I love. One of the pictures is in the vestibule of our church here. When you enter and look to your left, you will see the picture of Christ. And every time I see that picture of Christ, he's looking right at me and he's saying, "Hey, Vin, how you doing today?" There's a lot of other pictures of Christ that don't talk to me, but this one does. There's also another picture that really means something to me. And I don't know if you've ever seen it or not. It's my favorite picture, all right? And I'll try to explain it to you. All right, it's Jesus standing at a door with a lantern in one hand and his hand raised, knocking on the door. Now, I looked that up on Google, just so that I could refresh my memory. And what I found out that there's hundreds of pictures of that same scene. But the one that I like the most is this one because it's happening at dark. Obviously, the lantern is well lit. Now, if somebody knocks on your door during the daytime, it's usually an insurance agent, it's usually UPS, the mailman, it's business. But if someone knocks on your door at night, all right, it's social, it's friendship, all right? So this knock is happening at night. And what also is interesting is that when you look at this door, there is no outward knob. There is no outward handle. So even if somebody on the inside said, "The door's open, come on in," the person standing on the outside couldn't come in. All right? That's significant. Because in order for Jesus to enter your life, to enter my life, you have to open the door of your heart. And I realized that, like that concept. And that came to me, like after the first arise, I started to say that what can I do to increase my relationship with this Jesus? And I found out that if I practiced meditation, and I was never good at meditation, I was a complete failure at meditation. All right, but if I tried to practice it, all right, then I was trying to at least open the door. And the words Be still. I am your God. I am your lover. I am here for you. All right, and it's because of that, all right, that I was able to overcome, like my doubts. So let's talk, instead of talking about me, let's talk about Thomas. In order to do that, I want to bring you up to the upper room, all right? All right, this is the upper room where days before there had been a great celebration. Passover was a festive day for the Jews. It was very festive. It wasn't like Yom Kippur, which was solemn, and very dark. Passover was a joyous day. Now, we see the picture of the apostles sitting at the Last Supper table. But what we didn't realize, and if we read what happened on Good Friday, we'll start to realize that it wasn't only the apostles that were at the last meal of Jesus. It wasn't only the apostles that were celebrating this Passover. All right? The Blessed Mother was there. Mary Magdalene was there. Mary, the mother of James, was there. Salome, the mother of James and John, was there. How do we know that? The gospel doesn't tell us. But if we use a little deductive reasoning, they had to be there. All right, because these women were at the foot of the cross when Jesus was dying. How did they get there? They're from Galilee, all of them, just like Jesus. There were approximately 12 hours between the time that Jesus was arrested and the time that he died on the cross. All right? The distance between Galilee and Jerusalem, in our term, would be the distance from Tom's River to Cape May. Right? Did they take the red eye? Did they take the Midnight Express or Greyhound? Of course they didn't. What we have to realize is that they accompanied Jesus for the whole year of his public ministry. In fact, there are many theologians that believe that Mary Magdalene was an actual apostle. She was there throughout his whole public ministry. So they were there at the Last Supper, and it was a joyous occasion. But now, when we go up there in this gospel reading, all right, when we enter that room, the smell of fear is overpowering. Everybody in that room feared for their own life. That's why the door was locked. They exuded fear. Why? Because the Romans not only executed the head of the conspiracy, they also executed the main members. That included the apostles. And the Romans were not adverse to crucifying women. All right, if they felt the women were part of this conspiracy, they would also be crucified. All right, so all we see and all we smell is this tremendous fear. And all of a sudden, Jesus appears amongst them. And what is his first words? Peace be with you. All right, it's okay. I'm here now with you. All right? Put your fear behind you. And all he does is try to comfort them. He realizes that Thomas was not there. So he comes back a week later because he knows that Thomas is a special person. Thomas is a fact person and not a faith person. Thomas believes that 2 + 2 is 4. Anything else is nebulous to Thomas. All right, and Jesus comes back especially for Thomas. He's going to minister to Thomas. And once again, he comes into the room, just appears, locked room, and says again, peace be with you. And then he goes up to Thomas and he says, listen, he says, I know it's hard for you, okay? You are a fact person. All right, so here's my hands. Put your fingers in my hands. Okay, put your hand in my side. All right? Will that help you believe? And then, he says something very interesting. Before he says these words, only God could forgive sin. But Jesus gives them the power to forgive sin. It was almost like Jesus saying, sin doesn't matter. Even you can forgive sin. After that time, he breathes on them, right? And this is John's way of explaining the Pentecost, all right? The indwelling of the Spirit. And from that time forth, the apostles overcame their fear. They no longer had fear, but they were able to go out and preach the word of God. There's one other element that I want to bring into this, right, is that the very time that they spent in that upper room meant so much to them. It was a comfort for them. Even in their fear, they were able to comfort one another. That became the centermost part of the very early church. The first reading from the Acts, Luke tells us, all right, that they were a community, common, communion. They appreciated the companionship of the upper room so much that later on they formed this community where everything was shared. It was the earliest example of communism that we have ever seen. Are you shocked I said communism? All right. Atheistic communism from Karl Marx is different from theistic communism. The early church practiced theism communism. In other words, if you look up communism in Webster's dictionary, you will find that it is a place where there is no possessions, that everybody shares everything. That is theistic communism. And that is what the early church had. They shared everything amongst them. Nobody suffered from hunger. Everybody sold what they had and put it into a pot, and everybody shared. We find this in the 60s and 70s. We found, the hippies trying to practice this. And they would have done a good job if it wasn't for the free love and the drugs. But yet it was the common life that attracted them. And what we find today is that many of our religious orders practice communism. All right? The order that most of us are most familiar with now because of Thomas Merton, Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, are the Trappists. They practice communism. All right? They live a common life. All right? Even though there is an abbot and there has to be a leader, he is equal to the rest of them. Whether you're a priest or a brother you're all equal. You all share the same meal. You all have to go out into the fields and work your labor in order to support the whole congregation. All right, so this is the element that attracts people, all right, to community. And the last thing that I want to say is that we had community before the pandemic. In this very church, all right, we had the spirit of community. All right, when we introduced people to this, they loved it. They loved the feeling of community. All right, you don't know what it is like for the 5 of us, the 4 clergy members and Joe, to be in an empty church, speaking to a camera. It is very difficult. We feed off of your faith. We feed off of your enthusiasm. And all of us cannot wait until we can get back together again so that we can be community, so that we can feed each other, so that we can console each other, so that we can love each other. And this all comes from that upper room experience. So, in closing, I would just like to say that we should say a prayer to Abba, our Father, that we are getting very close to the end of this pandemic. We would ask you, Father, to make sure that each one of us gets the vaccination. Each one of us not only protects ourselves, but protects one another, because we crave getting back into this community. Namaste.